The world is changing. Inspiration is everywhere. It has never been so easy to connect, share, and bring people together. We're learning from others and finding the best in ourselves. Challenging our beliefs. Sharing our vulnerability. Overcoming our fears. Transforming ourselves so we can transform the world. How far can we go?
This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is... This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Governor Jesse Ventura, the former professional wrestler turned actor, author, and politician. As a young man, you joined the Navy SEALs as part of Underwater Demolition Team 12 and served your country in the Vietnam War before being honorably discharged in 1975. You then started your career as a professional wrestler, soon becoming one of the most recognizable faces in the world of sport, fighting under the nickname The Body, and later being inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame. During that time, you starred in Hollywood blockbusters like Predator and The Running Man, while in 2009, you began hosting the popular TV show Conspiracy Theory. In the mid-90s, you ventured into the world of politics, which culminated in you being elected governor of Minnesota in 1998, beating both the Republican and the Democratic nominees. You believe that the two-party system is unfair and damaging to American politics, and you speak openly about the downfall of the American media, suggesting the mainstream news is nothing more than entertainment. Governor Ventura, welcome to London Real.
Thank you. It's great to be here. It's always fun to talk to the people across the pond.
Great to have you here, Governor. I wanted to start and just say, kind of on the back of a lot of the censorship we were feeling in 2020, and what was I was watching this city that I love, my adopted city of London, being locked down. I decided to run for mayor, and I had no experience in politics. I ran as an independent candidate. I spent 7 months. I drove 5,000 miles through this city, and in the end, I lost. But somewhere deep down inside, I was inspired by you, because I never studied politics, never wanted to be in politics, but I was sick and tired of this two-party system and no change, and I went for it. Honestly, I don't know about you, but I got a PhD in how the political system worked, and the media, it was not the prettiest thing to watch, but I'm glad I did it because I love this city and I want to see the best for it. So I guess I got you to thank for that. You ever look back on your time in politics and feel like you got a really serious education in the two-party system when you dove in there? Or what are your memories from that time?
Absolutely. The first thing you learn is how the deck is rigged against you. And the next thing you learn that I learned was, in front of the public, they're enemies, the Democrats and Republicans. But behind the scenes, if a third entity enters the fray, those two parties will jump in bed together to destroy the third entity. I'll give you the example. When I became governor of Minnesota, I had a Democratic-controlled Senate and I had a Republican-controlled House. For 3 years, it worked pretty well. Whichever side I sided with generally prevailed, because then it was 2-1. I was the ultimate independent. I didn't have a dog in the fight as far as between the Democrats and Republicans per se. But if I agreed with the Democratic position, they usually prevailed. If I agreed with the Republican position, they usually prevailed. Till the third year, the election year, I was required to submit the budget as the governor, which I did. Then the Democrats and Republicans jumped in bed together, got rid of my budget, came forward with their own. Their budget was fiscally irresponsible, what they did, so I vetoed it. It went back to them again. They overrode my veto twice, which was all I could do. And then that budget was implemented. Well, they thought they were going to hang me with this horrible budget, but I fooled them. I didn't run again. So they got stuck with their budget. And the very next year, at the end of their budget, we had a $5 billion deficit because of their fiscal irresponsibility and their attempt to get me politically. But I fooled them. I didn't run. And they ended up stuck with it. And then they had to scramble around and fix all the things they did. And the reason I say that is to tell people this. The United States is completely divided right now. And I like to brag and say, I'm the only one who can bring us back together. Because if I got elected president within 3 years, you'd see the Democrats and Republicans in bed together singing Kumbaya to oppose me. And that would thus heal the United States of America, wouldn't it? At least temporarily.
It's an interesting point because you saw this division early on. Obviously, it's magnified tremendously in the last 25 years to where I'm watching it, as an American over here in the UK, and I don't even recognize that country to a certain extent because it's so divided. Did you always only want to serve one term, or was that something you ended up having to do because of this?
No, there were multiple reasons I didn't seek a second term. People forget that I was a mayor first. I ran for mayor in 1990 of the sixth largest city in Minnesota, first ring suburb of Minneapolis, Brooklyn Park. So I had 4 years of experience governing at the truly ground level. That's where you learn. Try being a mayor, because as a mayor, you have to have a council meeting every week. And you know who's sitting out there? All the citizens. You have to look them eye to eye on a weekly basis. There's where the governing is, right there. You learn from that. Then when you get to governor, well, then you're isolated. You don't ever see the public face to face unless you want to, and then it's even worse as you get up at the federal level, and all that. But see, I had the experience of being at the ground level as a mayor before I became governor, and then watching how they manipulate to stop the third parties. They will always raise the bar. Like if they used what they require today, I could not even run, because today they require 10% to be considered major party. That's what they're deciding in Minnesota now. They're raising it up. Well, I was only polling 9% at the primary. Right. And in 6 weeks, I won the election. Why? I was allowed to debate. I got to be in the debates. The moment I went in the debates, it was a meteoric rise. They couldn't stop me then. They tried to cancel debates. They did everything they could because they saw the writing on the wall. The first debate, I made this huge, and I carried it right through to November, caught them. They weren't prepared for it. I upset the apple cart and I can't say I did it. You know who really did it? The people of Minnesota. Yeah. The people of Minnesota said, we've had enough. We're going to send a message. And they did.
You're giving me flashbacks, Governor, because at the time when I was running, the bookies, the betting agents here had me as second place for mayor of London. And the BBC went to have a debate. And I thought, well, this is fantastic. They invited 6 people to the debate, but not me.
Yeah, right? Well, then you piss somebody off.
Yeah, and that's when I started learning how the media, strangely, was co-opted into keeping the status quo of the two-party system. And I was trying to figure out, I'm like, well, why? They're not part of the system, not getting paid. But for them to keep that whole thing going, to keep the sources of information flowing, it's in everyone's interest to keep out these pesky voices of independent parties. And so they literally engineered me out of it. Our favorite BBC here, which is basically a propaganda arm for the government, engineered me right out of it. And it was fascinating. It's like I didn't exist in the news, but I existed everywhere else.
Well, here's where I had the advantage over you. When I talk, it's ratings.
Right.
So the media didn't run from me. They ran to me.
Right.
Because when I spoke, they got jumps in their ratings, and that's the difference between I love to brag about this. Do you know how much money I raised to become governor of the state of Minnesota?
How much?
Well, first I'm going to tell you a story. My dad was a World War II veteran, 6 bronze battle stars in Europe, right? And one day I came home and my dad said to me when I was a teenager, he said, my dad says, and he only had an 8th grade education, laborer. My dad says to me, all politicians are crooks. And I looked at my dad, and I was old enough, and I said, come on, Dad, you can't make a blanket statement like that. They can't all be crooks. He goes, yes, they are. I said, how? Why? Why do you say they're all crooks? And his simplistic answer was so good. He goes, they're all crooks because they spend $1 million for a job that only pays $100,000. Nobody would spend $1 million for a job that only pays $100,000. Well, to end my story, I only raised to become governor of Minnesota $300,000. That's all I raised. I made $120,000 a year for 4 years. That means I made $480,000 and I only spent $300,000. That means if my dad would have been alive, I could have said to my dad, your son is not a crook because I'm making more money doing the job than what I spent to get it.
And that tells you everything you need to know about the system. And nowadays, there's so much money involved. I mean, on that runoff election in Georgia you guys had a while back, it was like, I don't know the number, but it staggered me. It was like hundreds of millions of dollars being spent for that one seat.
Do you know why I laugh at it?
Why?
Because I laugh and go, if I were running, I wouldn't have to spend 1/10 of that amount of money. I wouldn't have to spend zilch. If I ran for president now, just allow me in the debates. If you allow me in the debates, if I use the old cliche against the Democrats and Republicans, if I can debate them, I can beat them. Because, see, I don't run against the opponent. I run against the two parties. I don't even say the opponent's name usually. I talk about strictly the two parties, how corrupt they are, and it's a two-party. I quote my friend Ralph Nader when I say it's a two-party dictatorship is what you have. It's a two-party dictatorship.
Are you going to run for president?
Probably not. I dabbled with the Green Party because really all I need is ballot access. Find me people that have ballot access in all 50 states and I'll do the rest. I tried the Green Party. It was a disaster. They don't know where they're going. They're divided in two. It would have required me to first fix the Green Party and then take on the Democrats and Republicans. Not even I could do that, Frank. I need to have a party behind me that's focused. And that's what I had in Minnesota with what we were then the Independence Party of Minnesota. We later affiliated with Ross Perot's Reform Party, but then we disaffiliated with them later when we realized they weren't a true third-party movement. They were just Ross Perot. And so we went back to being the Independence Party of Minnesota.
Governor, I saw you give a pretty passionate speech to, I believe it was maybe the Minnesota Assembly. I'm not sure what it was. On the day, I think that they were going to finally legalize medical marijuana, and it was powerful.
No, recreational.
Oh, recreational, right? They'd already done the medical. Can you talk about what you said? Why that moment was really important for you to be there, and how that subject touched your life so much?
Absolutely. First and foremost, it wasn't a full assembly. It was the committee, a couple of the committees I went to. And I laugh about it because I actually spent more time in the Senate and House buildings doing the marijuana stuff than I did 4 years as governor. Because when I was governor, they'd come to me. I didn't have to go over there. They'd come over to me. But no, what got me involved was this. About a decade ago, the First Lady of Minnesota, the 38th, my wife, Terry, developed late-in-life epileptic seizure disorder. She was seizing 2 to 3 times a week. And these were the debilitating seizures where the person is down on the floor, you're holding their head, You're making sure that they can breathe, that their air passages aren't obstructed. You're completely helpless until the seizure does what it's going to do. And you lay there in hopes of not watching the person you love most in the world die in your arms. That's how I felt. Well, what did we do? We went to the doctors. The doctors put my wife on 4 different seizure medications through pharma, one after the other, after the other, after the other. None of them worked. They all had horrible side effects. We were desperate, and we were reading how marijuana or cannabis was helping these epileptic children who were getting seizures. So I have my home in Mexico. I have friends from Colorado at the time, which was the first state to lift the prohibition. Hooray to Colorado. They have a place in my heart. They were the ones with the courage and the guts. I tried to do it 20 years ago when I was governor and ran into a brick wall. Anyway, had to drive my wife to Colorado. And it was this bad. She had a seizure in the motel the night before we got there. We get to Colorado. Our friends go in. Now they have cards to get it for them. So they're actually breaking the law to buy from my wife. But they went in and bought for her, and it was liquid, 3 drops under the tongue. They bought enough for her, 3 drops under the tongue, and then they started mailing it to us, so that we could have a supply. My wife has not had a seizure since.
Wow.
Since she took the 3 drops under the tongue. Now, I'm not saying it'll work for everybody. Nothing works for everybody necessarily, but there certainly are other people out there that can be helped and shouldn't have to go through what we went through. Well, then we come back to Minnesota and get it illegally. Minnesota finally legalizes medical. But because they're so restrictive, it costs me $600 a month to keep my wife seizure-free. And insurance won't pay for what works. They gladly pay pharma for all this, excuse my bluntness, bullshit medicine they gave. Oh, we'll pay for that. It don't work, but we'll pay for it. Cannabis, they won't pay for. It was costing me $600 a month. I can't write it off, can't do nothing to keep my wife from having seizures. I almost moved to Colorado because I thought this is the price of a mortgage. I can move out to Colorado, get it for my wife out there for probably $40 a month. Save myself over $500. Well, they've opened up in Minnesota now. Now it's down to $300. And the reason I want the recreational, first and foremost, they shouldn't even divide it up. My good friend Tommy Chong, who knows more about pot than anybody on the planet, Tommy told me that's a mistake because the entire plant is medical. Those that smoke it for the euphoric feeling in the head, they're doing it for mental health. They're doing it to calm down, to relax, or like what I use it for, sleeping. I have nonspecific neuropathy of the feet. In other words, my feet are numb and they can't tell me why. I went to the Mayo Clinic. I can't sleep at night. And everybody tells you today, if you don't get proper sleep, you get all these other bad things happen to you. Well, I can't sleep unless right before bed, I do cannabis, which dulls down my feet problem. And it also works on my post-traumatic stress from the veteran stuff.
Right.
And so both my wife and I have been saved by marijuana, but my wife especially. And all we're asking for is open up the market, treat it like alcohol. And then they talk here. I'm going to bitch now about this. Then they talk about at what age. And they get all these scientists come in and say the human brain keeps developing till age 25 and THC can have an effect on the brain. So to be perfectly safe, you shouldn't let anybody use marijuana till they're 25. My response to that is wait a damn minute. I was 18 years old when I enlisted in the United States Navy. I went at age 19 through Navy SEAL training in Coronado. You know about that. Mm-hmm. At age 20, I had deployed to a 9-month deployment, Southeast Asian, came home from Vietnam. I had been back 1 week, and I went into my executive officer and I said, I want to go back to Vietnam right now. He said, what's the problem? I said, here's the problem. Over there, I'm an adult. Here, I'm a child. Sir, I can assure you I am no longer a child after going to war.
To continue watching the rest of the episode for free, visit our website londonreal.tv or click the link in the description below.